Welcome into another edition of Going for Two, presented by Home Field Apparel. I am Bryan Fischer. My partner in crime, Matt Brown, not with us this weekend. It appears he wanted to really flee Chicago in advance of a storm. Let's be honest. Headed down to Arizona for a reporting trip, and I'm sure to enjoy that great sunshine they have down there in the Phoenix area. But don't worry, although we miss Matt, and he'll be back next week to kind of explain and give us some down low in terms of what's going on there down in the desert. We have a great episode in store for you. Justin Ferguson of the Auburn Observer is going to join us to kind of explain all things about the Tigers, really what's been going on down there in the Plains these last couple of weeks for sure. Kind of get into the details as well, in terms of the AU basketball program, ultimately some of the Olympic sports that, the university is really emphasizing, and kind of give us the state of affairs, down there in Auburn, as a lot of focus is on that university, on that athletic department, these last couple of weeks, given everything that is going on, and really seems to be going on every couple of years. It seems like Auburn is making the news for all the wrong reasons, but we're going to get into that and more with Justin. A reminder, though, this podcast is presented by Home Field Apparel. If you want 15% off some gear, even if you're an Auburn fan, they got some great shirts. 15% off. Use the promo code Extra Points. A great way to stock up. They've got a great edition now coming on Big Noon Saturday. Illinois coming to the masses right now. I know I got a cousin who was getting married. I already got him a gift, but I think an additional Home Field Apparel shirt or two might be up his alley, given that he did his undergrad there in Champaign. But excited to see that collection. Extra Points is that promo code. But without further ado, let's bring on Justin and dive in deep in terms of the university that pretty much everybody in college athletics has been talking about these last couple weeks, given the chaos that is happening down there in the Plains. Let's turn it over to Justin. All right, thrilled to welcome on Justin Ferguson of the Auburn Observer. And Justin, I'm sure it is a much calmer week there on the Plains than the last couple of weeks have been. But what has it been like there around Auburn these last really the last 2.5 weeks? And is the Bryan Harsin saga maybe even in the top 5 of the craziest Auburn stories that you've known about?
I mean, this has got to be up there in the top 5 for sure. The fact that we went through a week where it's like, okay, Bryan Harsin's job is in jeopardy, and you spend a week saying, okay, is there any way this guy comes back from everything that's been, put out and leaked? And, it seemed to be an untested situation, but he held firm. Auburn went through their investigation, and he's still the head coach. And to be in that spot this quickly after just year one, it's so bizarre, and it's one of those things where I think I've kind of described this as kind of like the peak Auburn story, because it's all the chaos and all the warring factions and like, oh, what is actually going on, and then a wild ending, that we didn't see all in one.
I mean, how much of this started way back when he was ultimately hired? Obviously, there was a lot of talk about how AD Green kind of went out on a limb by himself to make this hire and bring in a bit of an outsider from the SEC. How much did it kind of start there versus kind of finish up this last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been people around Auburn that weren't too happy with the fact that Auburn got somebody who was an outsider. Now, I think Bryan Harsin had a lot of supporters early on because of kind of some of the things he said and the style he wanted to bring, the culture change and all that. But you got to back it up with results. And also in the SEC, when you have a losing streak like you do to end the year, and your recruiting class hasn't really done what you would normally expect for an Auburn team to get, while the rest of you, I mean, think about it from Auburn's perspective, your 3 biggest rivals have won the last 3 national championships in a row. That'll make a lot of people crazy. And so I think, the big thing was that, Bryan Harsin was always kind of viewed by some people as an outsider. It's like, oh, I don't know if this is necessarily going to work. And so when there was an opening where it looked like, oh, this, he might not be around anymore, I think there were some folks around Auburn that were not going to turn down an opportunity to kind of crank up some of that pressure and their discord about the Harsin situation. So I think a lot of it comes back to the fact that some people wanted to see a more familiar name, didn't want to see a guy from the West come in. And even though I think he earned some respect, I mean, they started 6-2. The way the season ended and the way it kind of played out in recruiting had a lot of people going up. Yep. If they had a really good recruiting class, or if they would have won the Iron Bowl, or just prevented the big comeback that Mississippi State had there, like just it was all of like the losing streak, and then all the stuff happening off the field, and then the recruiting, kind of not being up to normal standards. I think any reasonable person around Auburn could have expected, year one's not going to be the ultimate telltale sign of his recruiting ability, but when you lose as many players as Auburn has done in the portal, and you haven't brought as many in, that can kind of be amplified. So, yeah, I think, if they beat Alabama in the Iron Bowl, or if they, turn around one or two of those losses down the stretch, which is tough because it really all swung when Bo Nix got hurt. You probably aren't in this situation. You probably aren't in this situation where this gets out to a degree where people are trying to kind of push, it seemed like kind of push him out the door. So, I mean, it all happens in the context of 5-game losing streak, and the rest of your rivals seem to be in a much better spot in the user program already.
I mean, you mentioned those rivals. Obviously, they've been dealing with the Nick Saban death machine, across state for a long time now. But it's Georgia, it's LSU, obviously winning titles. You go back even Clemson, kind of a regional rival as well that they've played several games the last couple of years against. Is that just kind of amp things up in terms of not only do we got to deal with what's happening in state, what's happening with our program, it's everybody else that is also applying pressure. You can go with A&M. I mean, look at Fisher's recruiting class. They got to play them every year. Is it just kind of the added pressure kind of ramped up these last couple of years just because what everybody else is doing?
Oh, absolutely. I joke all the time. The Nick Saban era at Alabama has kind of broken everybody, and like what expectations should be, and especially when you're the Auburn's big, when you're Alabama's biggest rival, there's a lot to that, and people want to see Auburn be more consistently competitive. That was what was said when Bryan Harsin was hired by pretty much everybody on board. It's like, hey, the Gus Malzahn era had some really, really high moments. Nobody had done a better job against Saban than Auburn under Malzahn, but wanted it to be more consistent. And then you see Georgia do what they do, and you see what LSU did when they had their kind of like 2010 Auburn moment where everything fell into place and they just ran through the league like that. And then Texas A&M on the rise. I think even though Auburn beat them last year, people are looking over at Ole Miss and saying, okay, there's something clicking there, especially with the way they're doing in the transfer portal. Same thing with Arkansas. It's just that, there's a lot of teams around you that you have to play every single year that are in more stable situations. And I think the big thing is the Bryan Harsin was never going to be a quick fix. It was going to be a process. It was going to be a long-term build. But when everything happens the way it does, it just ratchets up the impatience because, I think for some fans, Auburn, had the fact that, they could make 1980 jokes at Georgia for forever. Now they don't have that to hold over their heads anymore. And I think that's also just kind of ratcheted up the frustration from the general fan base about, kind of what's going on with Auburn football.
I mean, when you pull back, this is obviously a program that has won a lot over a variety of different coaches. I mean, you go obviously Pat Dye, historic run, Shook Jordan before that, but Tommy Tuberville has had success there. You had the Gus Malzahn playing for a national title. I mean, coaches can win there, but has it been a bit surprising that all this chaos has gone on and they've still been able to kind of overcome it for a lot of coaches and still win, some big games?
Yeah, it is wild. I think Auburn's one of those places where year in and year out, you are going to get talent more often than not that is among the best in college football. You look at Auburn, they are, for those of you who may listen who don't know exactly where Auburn is, it's about 20, 30 minutes from the Georgia state line in East Alabama. They recruit the state of Georgia super, super hard. And that is one of the best talent, spots in the country to hit from. And then Alabama's always a solid spot. And then Florida, and then, they've been able to pick some spots there and that. So you're always going to have this baseline of talent at Auburn because you are an SEC school. You're an SEC West school. You have the spotlight on you because, you're the only team that has to play, Alabama, Georgia, and LSU all in the same year. So there's always going to be, big game atmospheres. It is, a college town that, really, really sells out for football. And that's appealing to a lot of people. Alabama and Georgia can pitch the, we'll get you to the league. We'll win titles here. And Auburn has never historically been that team, but they've been able to get star power decade after decade just the right players, the right teams, the big spots, and they can kind of pitch themselves a little bit as that anti-Alabama, that anti-Georgia, and it works well for them more often than not. So yeah, even with all the chaos, even though people would want Auburn to be a lot more consistent as a program, I mean, dating back to it really started the Pat Dye era. It's like this is the one program that loves to slay the giant more than anybody else, and they swing like a giant a lot of times because of the resources and the facilities and the talent you can bring into a place like Auburn.
So you do kind of mention they're close to the Georgia border. Obviously, it's a straight shot, pretty easy to get to Atlanta. Obviously, you have the North Florida into the Panhandle. You can get into the rest of the state. What is kind of Auburn itself as the town for maybe those that haven't been there, haven't been to a game at Jordan-Hare? How would you kind of explain Auburn in general?
Yeah, Auburn is a pretty classic college town. It sits about an hour and a half away from Atlanta to the southwest. It's a spot in the state of Alabama where it's not near it's kind of close to Birmingham, kind of close to Montgomery, but it kind of sits in its own little pocket. And it is very much the community revolves around Auburn University. And the surrounding area revolves around Auburn University. There's a lot of, it's a town that has exploded in size in the last 10 years. And it's because a lot of people want to be around Auburn, the school, and they want to be around, I think obviously the athletics is a big part, but it's a very laid back, small college town kind of feel that, I think appeals to people that don't necessarily want the big city, but don't want to live in like rural spots in the state of Alabama or in West Georgia. So yeah, it is, if you close your eyes and imagine what a Southern college town would look like, I think Auburn checks a lot of boxes. Not quite as big as Athens or Gainesville, but kind of in that ballpark.
Now, it's been interesting. All this kind of recent chaos, if you could say that, has gone on as there's been a presidential transition at the university. Somebody that has spent a lot of time there and obviously is from the faculty there. What might change as Jago kind of moves on and some new leadership takes over there at the university?
Yeah, it's interesting. Auburn, the day everything kind of popped off, they were like, oh, by the way, here's our new president. He's coming in May and taking over. But yeah, Chris Roberts has been with the engineering school, which if you don't know anything about Auburn, engineering is kind of one of their big things, and it being an agricultural school. So he's been around for a while. He knows Auburn. He understands Auburn. Auburn went out and got a president in Stephen Leith from Iowa State. And that was just not a good tenure all the way around. So I think there was a lot when they brought Jay Googe back to be the interim, and he served well in his time. But the thing about Googe in his first run and in his second run, more hands off with athletics, kind of just lets it kind of go and lets the athletic department, kind of run it from there. From what I know about the new guy coming in, Roberts, is he's a guy who's big in Auburn athletics because he's an Auburn guy or has become one in the decades that he's been around. Very involved with football and basketball at a lot of events. So I think the change moving forward, I think, is going to be interesting to see for Auburn because, you've got more people that have been around for a little bit longer. I think, there's going to be kind of a push to have more Auburn folks kind of running the show at the university level. And I'm interested to see how much that affects athletics because Allen Green it's an interesting situation with him. He's in his last year of his contract, which is not what you get a ton with the Power 5 AD. So it'd be very interesting to see if there's a change there, what a new president, what the board of trustees kind of would look at in hiring the next guy, whenever Green moves on.
I mean, I don't know if I spoke to anybody that thinks Allen Green's going to be there in say 2023. I think that is kind of the expectation that he will move on to some other jobs. His name has been floated certainly for a few other AD jobs out there, a few other positions. But ultimately, should he move on and the new president has to make a hire, you mentioned more Auburn folks. I mean, are they going to look for an AD who has been there before, somebody who has those Auburn ties, who either went to school there, or is it possible they could still go out kind of outside the family, even though it maybe not quite as worked out as they had hoped when they went to get Allen Green?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The couple of names that people usually float out when they think of like, oh, who could be next? It's usually internal guys and folks that have been around Auburn for a while in different capacities of athletics. Now, Auburn has some folks that are in athletic departments elsewhere around the country that have worked in Auburn in the past. So, you know, I would never rule anything out at a place like Auburn, but you know, I think if whenever they have to hire their next AD, I would be very surprised if it was somebody that doesn't have some sort of Auburn connection in their past, whether it's somebody who went to school here, worked here in the past, or is currently working here now. Because you know there are a few people that people have always kind of floated around. It's okay, well maybe this person would be a good candidate moving forward. So I think kind of like with the president situation, wouldn't be surprised if somebody who at least knows the area and knows Auburn really well would be kind of the move. You know, whenever Alan Green is no longer Auburn's AD.
I think knowing the university is huge at Auburn because we talk about booster culture, and Auburn has maybe the most unique booster culture. You know, certainly the reputation precedes them in terms of that. If you can maybe kind of sum up for that, you know, sum up how the boosters work and what the relationship. I'm sure folks have maybe heard about Bobby Louder and some of his exploits, maybe Jimmy Rain, but like when it comes to the boosters themselves at Auburn, especially the powerful ones, you know, on the board of trustees or whatnot, how would you kind of sum up, you know, their relationship with the university and how they kind of wield their influence?
Yeah, it's crazy because there really is a lot of divide, and I think we saw this when the Bryan Harsin move was made and the search, how chaotic it was before, and people talking about Kevin Steele and kind of bringing that in. You know, there seems to be a lot of division and a lot of, you know, people not being on the same page with one another, and it kind of strikes me a lot as you know, pre Nick Saban Alabama, where you had different warring factions and people all trying to, you know, have their sway and their influence, and it kind of creates a lot of chaos and there's a lot of chatter. The funny part about Auburn's boosters that I think is real funny is there's always this talk about, you know, how much power they have and how much, you know, influence they have. If you look back in the last decade, it's like, okay, these are all the things that the boosters apparently want at Auburn. Very few of those things have come to pass. So it is one of those things where, like, you know, I think it is not everybody's on the same page, and it makes it like less effective and more chaotic on the outside. You know, it's people admit, you mentioned Bobby Louder. You mentioned, you know, kind of the past with Pat Dye. It's like there were stretches of times in Auburn's history where there was like one unifying force and kind of pushing it forward. It's been a while since they've had that. And so there isn't like this kingmaker or like this one clear one. There are several people with power and money and influence at Auburn that you know, never can seem to be quite on the same page. And I think it kind of spills out into some of these situations like you just had with Bryan Harsin, where you know, when it's like an HR investigation and people are looking at, there are people who wanted to benefit from that news getting out. But it definitely, not everybody was on the same page, and you know, he's still the head coach now.
I mean, you mentioned the background, certainly with the school being a heavy engineering focus, obviously agriculture as well. And, you know, based back on the start of the day, when the university was founded, how much does that kind of inform the Auburn ethos and what the fan base kind of feels, how they're kind of responded to in the SEC? How much does that kind of play a part of their identity?
Yeah, it is a big thing. I mean, you know, Auburn is the ag school. They're not the state school. And, you know, Auburn fans are very proud of, you know, there's a lot of things, you know, Bear Bryant and the history of Alabama calling it a cow college. And people take pride in that because when you look at engineering and agriculture, some of these big boosters we were talking about have made millions and millions, like gotten very, very rich off of, you know, things they learned at Auburn. And it is a school that produces, you know, relative to their SEC counterparts, pretty high, you know, average salaries and stuff like that. So there's a lot of that where people are very proud of, you know, kind of how Auburn has had that kind of influence and impact. And then they see just different other ones, like, you know, Tim Cook is an Auburn guy, and there's a number of ones that may not necessarily fit the ag school model, but you know, have kind of made their impact in that. So Auburn's very proud because they look at themselves as, you know, we are, you know, the small college town, but whenever you can make, you know, have these national figures, these international figures kind of stand out, it's something that they can kind of poke the chest out about a little bit, and they take a lot of pride in, you know, kind of the little old Auburn kind of influence in all these different areas.
Now, if there's a lot going on the football side of things, things are going pretty well on the basketball side. Obviously, with Bruce Pearl getting things rolling, what has it been like to cover Bruce in particular, and how has this kind of run kind of compared to that earlier Final Four run that they've had? Is the Furor just around town kind of even bigger than it was?
Yeah, because I think that first Final Four team that they had kind of, midway through SEC play, there were people who were like, man, is this team going to make the tournament? They kind of caught fire and went on the run. This team has been dominant from the get-go. And it's really interesting to see because Bruce Pearl has been the model of what it takes to be a long-term success at a school. Bruce Pearl is an ace recruiter, but he's also an ace, salesman for his program. And he did a lot of work early on to get people excited about Auburn basketball when the on-court product didn't have a lot to get people excited about. But he found the right combination of players around that Final Four run. These guys who were, either low 4 stars or 3 stars that weren't necessarily being courted by the big names in college basketball. And they played in a system and they played in a style and they got going. And now he's got it to the point where, Auburn has had a run where they have produced several guys that have gone on to become pros. Isaac Okoro, Chumo Kiki. These guys weren't necessarily household names. They became first-round NBA draft picks. And there's more and more attention that they've gotten into it. And now Auburn is pulling in 5 stars. And they have Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler. The 2 highest-rated players they've ever gotten before are playing in the same front court at the same time. And it's just kind of a testament of, building it, getting people excited, and then turning it loose in recruiting. Bruce said it recently. He was like, we did pretty well with some 3 stars and 4 stars. Now we're getting 5 stars, and I'm a whole lot better coach with 5 stars. But it's just kind of the build and then kind of turning it loose. And the other thing we mentioned earlier with the geography, Auburn owns Atlanta recruiting in basketball. Like no other school in the country comes close to recruiting that Atlanta town area. That's where they got Jabari Smith. That's where they've got Walker Kessler. They got a few other guys on this team right now that were top Atlanta prospects. And so it took a while to get going, but this is kind of the pinnacle of this long-term build that before Bruce Pearl arrived, this was one of the worst Power 5 basketball teams in the country. And now they're at a point where, they are most likely going to be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And right now, as we talk, they've got a multi-game lead in the SEC title race. And those 2 things have only happened a small amount of times in Auburn basketball history.
I mean, how sustainable is that for Bruce and that program? Because, Kentucky's been not quite the Kentucky level that we expected the last couple of years, even though they've been rolling in 5 stars and in first-round draft picks. Obviously, the rest of the league has maybe been down a little bit this year in terms of the overall depth compared to maybe past years. But when you look at how sustainable it is, because of that connection to Atlanta, I mean, is this something that they expect to contend for the Final Four again next year and the year after that? Or is it just kind of, we understand this is a bit of a moment that we're having there in the Plains?
I think this season is like people are realizing, okay, Jabari Smith might be the number 1 pick in the draft, and Walker Kessler is a 7-1 shot blocker and scorer around the rim that is at these super high efficiency levels. You don't usually get both of those at the same time, but the backbone of this team has been recruiting and development from the Atlanta area. And also Bruce and he did this before the portal era was a thing, hitting transfers really, really well. This team has got a ton of transfers that play high value roles for them. And so I think Auburn's kind of set up to be a team for a while that can be among the best in the SEC. I mean, in the last 5 years, nobody's had a better record in SEC play than Auburn. They are going to want to keep that going. You may never get a Jabari Smith and a Walker Kessler combo ever again, but like those are rare for anybody to have. But I think there's a lot to like about the way they built this program because it kind of recruits itself. You have the excitement level, you have the NBA draft buzz that's starting to build around Auburn, and they really pride themselves when you see the home court advantage and you see the way they play. They really pride themselves in being a fun program, and it is starting to get a lot more people's attention, not only in high school recruiting but also in the transfer portal. And Bruce has had a great track record with those guys.
definitely an electric atmosphere there, and it doesn't just extend to the basketball court and obviously the football field. It looks like Auburn, certainly they have Sunisa Lee coming in and energizing that gymnastics program. I know they're obviously big in softball and baseball. If you kind of had to sum up the other kind of Olympic sports, if you will, what's the focus of Auburn, and where do they kind of puff their chest out a little bit higher in terms of those Olympic sports?
Yeah, right now it's definitely gymnastics because you have that special connection where your head coach's twin brother was Suni Lee's personal coach, and it's like, okay, NIL, it all was just this perfect storm that all came together. But Auburn Gymnastics has had a really good run the past decade. They used to be just kind of a program that was in the second tier, but they are, SEC Gymnastics is a huge, huge deal, and they are recruiting not just Suni Lee, but they're recruiting a really high level. They're selling out meets. They want to be kind of up there with the Alabamas and the Floridas and the LSUs and the Georgias of SEC gymnastics. So it's a big one. And baseball and softball is always going to be a big, focus around here. These are two programs that have really invested kind of in recruiting and pitching and, had their high moments and low moments recently, but a lot of emphasis towards those sports as well. But it'll be interesting to see moving forward kind of where else Auburn has got swimming and diving. If you don't know about Auburn kind of long-term history, back in the day, 90s and early 2000s, they were in the 80s as well. They were a fantastic swimming and diving program. Rowdy Gaines is one of the best Olympic swimmers ever, went to Auburn. And they had a run where they were producing national champions and Olympic medalists year after year. And for the last decade or so, they have not gotten back to that level. You have seen they brought a former champion from the program that had done good work as an assistant elsewhere to try to build that back up. So that's the one I'm really interested in because Auburn, they're trying to build something new with gymnastics and basketball and some of these other sports. But I think there's a decent amount of people around here who remember the glory days of the swimming and diving program, and they want to kind of get back to that. So it'll be interesting to see what the investment level looks like from there moving forward.
Before you came on, we were talking to David Ubben about his NIL story, which I think made the waves quite a bit in the SEC. I'm curious, how does Auburn approach kind of NIL in general? Who have maybe been some of the big athletes that you've seen take advantage of this, and how does maybe a university like Auburn, given the unique place that they're in, just at being a college town, kind of having the focus of not just half a state, but half of the other state in Georgia there, how much has NIL kind of played a role in the school and what the athletic department can ultimately sell?
Yeah, it's been a really big deal, and it definitely helps when you have a gold medalist in Suni Lee who can be the kind of the poster child of it. But you go back to this first year, this run, just kind of organically, Bo Nix, I know, and he's now at Oregon, but he raked in a lot of money in NIL because if you are the starting quarterback at Auburn University, you have this giant platform, not only in the state, but being close to Atlanta. Atlanta is where the biggest percentage of alumni live for Auburn. A lot of people go up to Atlanta, so there are a lot of marketing opportunities up there. We've seen it with Jabari Smith. It was part of the pitch Auburn made when he came in. Say, hey, we're going to, he wants to come play here and not go to the G League and not go to overseas or do anything like that. And they work close with Under Armour to help get a deal with him and kind of get that going. We've seen a lot of social media based deals, but there's some big heavy hitters, and I think the big thing there is just you show the influence of NIL and what this can mean is because Auburn is in a spot where the state of Alabama doesn't have pro sports. Alabama and Auburn are your pro sports. Now you'll have people who are fans of the Atlanta teams, especially. But this is everybody's kind of big thing. Like if you're an Auburn fan, there's a good chance that this is your number one team. And so that passion and that level of excitement and investment, it's a pretty captive audience. And I think there are businesses around the state and around the Southeast that have tried to tap into that because it is a kind of unique spot. Not every state has this kind of situation when you're the top game in town or you're the top game in the state. And Auburn tries to take advantage of that a lot.
It's interesting with NIL. Obviously, the state just repealed, their law. Kay Ivey, the governor, is an Auburn alumna. What is the kind of state of affairs in Alabama itself between Auburn fans and Alabama fans. Obviously, you hear about the Harvey Updikes, and I think that obviously overshadows the rivalry a little bit. But outside of kind of the Iron Bowl itself, when that game is on, what is kind of this daily state of affairs for Auburn fans in that state?
Yeah, it is. It is a 24/7, 365 thing, and it goes well beyond football. It used to be kind of the big football. Yeah, everybody's excited about football and what that provides. But you look at both Auburn and Alabama in men's basketball, the investment they have put into those programs and the runs they've made recently. It is a pretty heated rivalry in basketball as well. We talked about some of these other gymnastics. I mean, Auburn is finally on a level where they can beat Alabama in gymnastics. There was a stretch where Alabama didn't lose to Auburn in gymnastics for decades and decades. So Auburn has tried to paint itself as this everything school. It's kind of the thing that Bruce Pearl talks about all the time. And so over the last 10 years, I think we have seen this rivalry grow from mainly football focused to everything. And there's always been that feel of hey, you'll want to beat Alabama in anything if you're an Auburn fan. But with the SEC network money, with the amount of investment we have seen football money go into other sports, there are some sports where Alabama's been good at that Auburn is back up to. There's been sports that Auburn's been good at that Alabama's built up to. And then there's some where they don't really have a ton of history, both of them, but there's a lot of heated kind of competitiveness between the two. So it is a rivalry that I think is a lot of fun because it happens all year long. Football will always be the top game, but there's always somebody. There's always a game next. There's always a sport next where you can say, okay, we'll get you this time. And so it makes it pretty fun. And I think for the most part, it tends to be fairly civil. Yeah, I think the Updike situation was kind of like this anomaly and this outlier. And I think a lot of Auburn and Alabama fans kind of looked inward and it's all right, we can't portray ourselves like this. And so it is a good, very, very heated, but rivalry that is extended to a lot of sports now.
I mean, when you go back through kind of especially the recent history, but with Auburn, there's obviously Jetgate. You had everything surrounding Cam Newton's recruitment, obviously in that national title season. What to you, kind of, how would you rank kind of the craziest Auburn moments? And is there anything that kind of comes top of mind? And this kind of really sums up this fan base and this school?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned two that were huge. The one that I will never forget about, and just how weird it was and just kind of tells you where expectations and fervor and just everything kind of gets out of control. The 2017 season, Auburn beats Georgia and Alabama, two number one teams in the span of 3 weeks. They punched their ticket to the SEC title game. And during that whole stretch, there's this very public, weird standoff about is Gus Malzahn thinking about going to Arkansas? And and so it was just these Auburn fans that were literally, they had beaten two number one teams back to back. They were going to the SEC title game, and our friends were all right, should we keep him around? Do we want him around? Should we pay him? And it was just this wild situation, and there were some bizarre press conferences and just social media posts and stuff like that. That is always the one that stuck out to me, where I said earlier, Alabama's just kind of broken everybody's brain. So it's Auburn is in this season that in the modern era is one of the best they've ever had. It fell apart down the stretch because of injuries, but you looked around at the end and you were like, that was really, really weird that they had gotten to that point where a win away from the playoff, and everybody was like, all right, do we keep the head coach around? Do we want to keep him around? And it was kind of the will they or won't they all the way to the end.
I mean, we'll circle back around, I guess, to the beginning there. I mean, Bryan Harsin, obviously, he kind of goes into, it feels like almost a lame duck kind of season the next couple of months. I mean, how is he able to survive this, I guess you could say? And is he going to be there in 2023? I mean, is the expectation kind of among the fan base, among the boosters, among pretty much everybody that, hey, we're going to go through this season, we'll see how it goes, and then whatever happens after that kind of happens?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it. I think everybody knows that, heading into 2022 is always going to be a tough year for Auburn. It's an even number year, which means you got to go to Alabama and Georgia. Those are always tough seasons for Auburn. And this roster has taken a step back. They have lost a lot in the portal. They haven't brought a ton in. And even before the situation with Harsin, everybody's kind of looking at what was going on with Auburn. And it's man, they've got to really click, and they've got to make it work. My biggest question for Auburn is that after spring practice and when this second wave of transfer portal movement comes, Auburn's got to be a big player in it. And they, 2023, the recruiting class in the state of Alabama, there are 5 5-stars and 15 4-stars. It is an elite class by these standards. Georgia and Florida are always strong in that area. It's a good opportunity for Auburn to show that, hey, this staff, this regime can recruit at the level that Auburn fans expect. It's going to be a whole lot harder to do that now when you just went through this situation where it's like, do people even want him around still? And like, there's a lot of dysfunction and instability. And internally, there's a lot of belief that, between the players and the coaches, it's like, no, that we can make this work. And, they still have Tank Bigsby. They've got some really good talent at all 3 levels of their defense, some star power. They've got an experienced offensive line coming back. If they can reinforce a couple of positions and say that, hey, year 2, the weirdness of what happened down the stretch, that's not indicative. The losing streak's not indicative of what this team really is. Maybe they can show some progress, hit the recruiting trail hard and move forward. But that's a lot of boxes they're going to have to check in a row. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on Bryan Harsin. And he knows that, and he knew that even before this whole situation. After they lost the Birmingham Bowl, he had a really long answer about learning and having to adjust and to adapt and building on it moving forward. So it's possible, but man, it's going to be really, really difficult. But I tell people this all the time. If you think you know what's about to happen with Auburn football, you need to go to Vegas, because no one can ever tell what this program's capable of at any given moment.
Isn't that the truth, though? Justin Ferguson of the Auburn Observer, where can everybody find your work and follow along? Because there will be no shortage of stories coming in there out of the plains.
Absolutely. So Auburn Observer is a newsletter that I run. In fact, Matt Brown was one of the big influences in me getting this started. So I cover Auburn football and men's basketball, do a lot of analysis, X's and O's, stat stories, kind of deep dives into different aspects of the programs. We post about 3 or 4 times a week newsletters. We do a couple podcasts as well. We have a free podcast you can listen to on the weekends. Just search Auburn Observer everywhere you find your podcast. But if you want to sign up and you want to be a part of the newsletter, it is auburnobserver.com. It's $6 a month or $60 a year. And everything we do gets emailed straight to your inbox, kind of like what you guys got going on here. And you can follow me on Twitter at jfergusonau.
There's nobody better covering Auburn right now, and we will definitely have to keep you in mind down the road as soon as the next crazy story comes out of the plains.
There will be something.
There will always be something. Thanks for joining us, Justin.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right, terrific interview there with Justin. Really appreciate his time and explaining, kind of getting into the details of what makes the Tigers tick. And it is a fascinating, certainly athletic department and university as a whole, especially as they navigate some choppy waters right now, as they're kind of used to doing. But they do have a lot going for the school itself. Matt will be on next week as we'll kind of return to a bit of our more normal, regularly scheduled program. I do want to remind you, though, if you like the podcast, if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, subscribe, give us 5 stars. It does make a world of difference if it's either Spotify or Apple, whatever podcast platform that allows you to hit those little star buttons. Please give us 5 stars. We think we are, not only worthy of that rating, but it certainly allows other fans that might like college athletics, might like our little spin on college athletics, to find the podcast itself a little bit easier. So we do appreciate if you give us those ratings. Go ahead and leave us a review if you want. We don't really care what you say, as long as it's nice and flowing and glowing about myself. Of course, you can say whatever you want about Matt, but we do appreciate those 5 stars and everything that goes along with it. Remember, promo code Extra Points if you want to save 15% off home field apparel. And if you haven't already signed up for the Extra Points the Extra Points newsletter, please do so. Got some terrific stuff coming from Matt. He already went over kind of the Horizon League, what all has transpired there. Terrific stuff. Collegiate Sports Connect as well on our video platform. There's some sign up links in the show notes. If you have any interest at all in joining college athletics or kind of getting into this industry, a terrific platform to join. We have some great content on there as well for both Matt and myself, and as well as our entire team. We, interviewed the Horizon League commissioner. We've had a number of folks around, from Kansas State and USC and really around the country, and some hard hitting, big pieces that really kind of can explain and dive in deep into the bigger storylines, not just in this podcast, but beyond in college athletics. So be sure to sign up for that ND1 ticker. I am Bryan Fischer. You can reach me on Twitter at Bryan D. Fischer as well. And we will catch you next week here on Going for Two.